Hello, in a small town near the Appalachians, where mine dust thickly covers window sills and baby cribs, a boy named Jacob Gray was born. His family lived in a trailer, between the highway and an abandoned quarry. His father worked in the mine, his mother worked in the local diner. Happiness was never in abundance there, but Jacob was given something more important than money: self-belief. His grandfather, a war veteran and an unrecognized inventor, told him from an early age, "The world doesn't ask where you're from, Jake. It asks what you can do." In school, Jake was quiet, a little clumsy, and always had a book with him. He was teased, but he didn't care. One day he found his grandfather's old typewriter in the attic. At night, when everyone was asleep, he began to write stories, articles, even fake newspaper articles from the future. And then his dream was born, to become a writer, but not just a writer. He wanted to tell stories that change people. Inspire. Bring them out of the shadows. His first serious test came at the age of 17. His father was buried under a mine collapse. Weeks in intensive care, debts, despair. Jake had to leave school and work in the same mine. All day, in the dark, in the evening, at a typewriter. He wrote stories about heroes who survive, fight and win. This was his salvation. One day he decided to send a short story to a national competition. He sent it, and forgot. A month later the letter came. He won. He was invited to New York. It was a chance. But there was no money for the trip. His mother pledged her engagement ring. Jacob left. New York was loud, cold and indifferent. Jake felt like a country boy, which he was. But his story captivated editors. He began to be invited to magazines. There was talk of publishing a book. But the market was cruel. He quickly realized that talent is not everything. You need to be able to sell yourself. And he couldn't. He worked in a bookstore, slept in the basement, ate cold pizza. His texts were rejected, they said, not the format. But he didn't give up. He studied. He studied marketing, copywriting, reader psychology. He rewrote stories dozens of times. Sometimes he reached the limit. On one of the darkest nights, when his laptop and all the drafts were stolen, he remembered his grandfather's words again. And sat down to write again. On paper. His first book was published by a small publishing house. It failed. But then a blogger with 1 million subscribers remembered it. Sales went up sharply. The book was republished. Tours, interviews, offers began. But with that came another side of fame: envy, criticism, distrust. He had a choice: change or disappear. And he chose to grow. After the first wave of popularity, Jake realized that the real struggle was just beginning. Most of his income was eaten up by taxes, agency fees, and advertising costs. He decided to take everything under control. He founded a small publishing house, gathered a team of like-minded people, and began to publish not only his own books, but also the works of little-known authors from small towns, the same as himself. His new book, Hand on Stone, became a symbol of his new stage. It was a story about a boy who had to keep his hand on a cold stone for eternity in order to save his village. The book was a metaphor for resilience. It impressed thousands of readers, fans, memes, even a tattoo with the cover appeared. But again, criticism. Too pathetic, too emotional. One day he was sitting in a coffee shop in Brooklyn when a girl came up to him. Her name was Amara. She said, "Your book helped me not to break down after my brother died. Thank you." And that moment changed everything. Not the sales. Not the likes. But the gratitude of people. For the first time, he realized that he had already achieved success, not in the eyes of critics, but in the hearts of people. But at the same time, he began to have problems with his mental health. Exhaustion. Panic attacks. Emptiness. He turned to a therapist. He started doing yoga, meditation. And most importantly, to write for himself. Not for the market. Not for sales. Just to breathe. It was then that the idea for his most ambitious book appeared, Mountains and People. It was about climbing. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. But before sitting down to write it, he decided to do what he had long been afraid of, to return home. The town hadn't changed. Except it had gotten a little grayer. The mine had closed, many of the trailers were empty, and the faces he had known since childhood were indifferent or tired. But there were still those who remembered Jake. They greeted him with reserve, as if ashamed of their respect. Jake settled in his grandfather's old house, long abandoned, but with surviving walls and an old stove. There he began working on Mountains and People. He wrote about his journey, but through the image of a fictional climber climbing a mythical peak that changes everyone who reaches it. This story demanded everything: discipline, pain, honesty. And the more he wrote, the more he realized that the mountain was not a peak, but a path to himself. At the same time, he began to meet with the youth in the town. He held free workshops, opened a small library in a trailer. Children, students, even tired adults began to come. When the local authorities wanted to demolish the building, people stood up for it. It was the first time he saw, stories can not only inspire, they can change reality. Mountains and Men was published a year later. It was not just a book. It was a call. It spread throughout the country. It was quoted by politicians, read at graduations, studied at universities. But Jake stayed in town. Because he understood, his success is not an escape, but a return. A few years after the publication of Mountains and Men, Jake felt that he had said everything he had. But something else was brewing in him. Not a book. Something more. In his dreams, he saw darkness from which faces emerged, his father, his grandfather, young Jake. And he understood, it was time to tell a story not about heroes, but about a person. About fear, about guilt, about unspoken things. He began writing the novel, 7 Seconds to Eternity, a book where each chapter lasted exactly 7 seconds of events. Every moment was decisive. Every word was like the last. And in this book, Jake allowed himself to be vulnerable for the first time. He wrote about his fear of death. About not having time to say goodbye to his father. About fatigue. About the silence after fame. It was the most personal work. And the riskiest. He knew that part of his audience would not accept this book. But it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't writing for them. Or even for himself. But for the guy in the trailer who once held an old typewriter in his hands. 7 Seconds to Eternity was an unexpected breakthrough. It was made into a film. It won the National Book Award. But for Jake, it was just an echo. He disappeared from the public space again. He was seen on the peaks of the Appalachians. In the trailer library. In the children's center. He was no longer chasing history. He himself became history. 10 years after his disappearance, a sign appeared in the town with the inscription, Jacob Gray Library. Stories begin here. The building was built by local residents. It became not just a center, but the heart of the community. People came there not only to read, but also to learn, to heal, to listen to music. Jake was not present at the opening. But he left a letter. I was not perfect. I made mistakes. But every line, every book, was my way of being there. Not to give up. And to believe. If you hold this book in your hands, then you are already on your way. Don't stop. In different corners of the country, story centers began to appear, small houses associated with his name, where one could write, learn, dream. Jacob Gray became a symbol of the fact that stories can change the world. But most importantly, they change those who create them. And somewhere far away, in the mountains, an old man lights a stove every day, reads letters from young authors and smiles. Because he knows, he did what he had to. And left a fire that will not go out.